In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military bases and chemical plants may be advised to evacuate.
All right, everybody. This is the Parrot Room version of the Sublation Magazine show. Chris Cutrone's here, Stephen Bertram Lee, Ashley Frawley. We've got some people in the back, behind backstage.
Why is it a parrot room?
Why is it a parrot room?
Yeah.
We all just repeat back what Doug tells us to say. Oh, I mean,
yeah,
no, right. It's a reference.
It's a reference to. All right. Blogging Heads TV has a show called The Wright Show. It's Robert Wright and Mickey Kaus.
Right.
And they started calling their Patreon-only podcast the Parrot Room. And the Parrot Room was the room where politicians it was in a brothel.
Right.
Right. And where all the secrets were divulged in the Parrot Room. So I then in one episode, Robert Wright said, I want all podcasts to call their Patreon only content Parrot Rooms.
And you're a loyal cadre of this guy.
And I'm like, yes, Robert, whatever you say. And then no one else has ever done it.
Is the brothel, is it an American reference or a French reference?
I think it was like an American reference. I think it was an American brothel and the owner of the brothel, the woman who ran it, loved parrots, and she had a room where she kept her parrots.
Maybe the squawking of birds is meant to stop eavesdropping.
Yeah, I mean, but also, weren't they maybe supposed to be imitating what they heard or something?
Yeah. And then later you can collect.
Use it against them. Yeah, blackmail.
Yeah.
Seems very
right. I don't know. I'll have to look into it further.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just saying it sounds less cool than the champagne room.
The champagne room's a little bit too hip hop, and hip hop's dead.
Yeah, I mean, we shouldn't say champagne room because we're not definitely not that kind of show.
No.
Well, I was gonna say that the brothel reference is a good one because I am definitely like on a mattress on the floor.
Actually, does look like a Twitch streamer.
You're hitting all your demographics. So.
Mm-hmm. All of them male. All of them male.
It's the default. It's the male gaze, after all.
Yeah, that's right. All right, so we were going to talk about
to get ahead in the world. What can I say?
Okay, we were going to talk about art, and actually, I wanted you to restate what you said in between, which was that because you came from dirt, as you said, you didn't get exposed to the art world very much growing up. You didn't go to museums. You didn't. That wasn't part of your world.
Yeah, I mean, like, okay, I shouldn't, like, my dad is like an autodidact, and he did like once take me to a film festival when I was like 6. I vaguely remember this. So there were attempts. However, no, I am extremely uncultured. Like, the extent to which I'm uncultured, I mentioned in the in-between, is like I never had dinners. Like, we didn't sit down and have dinner. I was just left completely alone in a house. Like, so I know nothing about food. I never went to a restaurant until I moved abroad, and I was like literally at a restaurant. And I was like, oh shoot, what am I supposed to do here? Like, literally like feral child.
But you watch TV.
So no, I didn't have TV either. So we had lots of books in our house, and I used to I once tried to read like the encyclopedias that we had wall to wall. I would go to the library and just read as many books as I could. So that's how I managed to not now currently live in dirt, thank God. But yeah, I know like nothing about art and that sort of thing.
You had literature. You had like literary art. You didn't have.
Yeah, but even then, like, I'm not a big reader of fiction and stuff. Like, when I watch TV, I want it to be the dumbest, stupidest. Like,
all right, so I'm gonna get very 101.
Entertain me, Magic Box. I no longer want to think today.
I'm gonna challenge you on this. I'm gonna be very 101. Right? I feel like I'm channeling Marcuse, but also maybe Friedrich Schiller.
I know, and that's why I'm angry.
No, I mean, it's like, you know, it's the world is full of aesthetic play, right? It's there, like whether it's formally objectified in art or not, and it's there in any cultural products, like whatsoever. So even like, you know, there's a poetry of the encyclopedia. You know, in other words, encyclopedia text has a poetics to it, right? So it's that dimension of things. So Marcuse wrote a book called The Aesthetic Dimension, right? And Schiller, it's Letters on the Aesthetic Education of Man. It's about the French Revolution and maybe society needs like to cultivate the imagination in order to really have freedom, right? And so it's part of everything. You know, it's clothes, it's cars, it's, you know, furniture, it's architecture, like it's everything. Like it's there, right? That doesn't make everything art, because art is like a formal objectification of that makes you pay attention to it in a way that you might otherwise just be immersed in it. But, you know, yeah, so I'm kind of pushing back on this militant Philistinism, because you kind of set yourself up as like, I'm the Philistine, you know, and I'm only interested in like, fuck my boss. Not fuck my boss like fuck my boss, but like fuck him, right? And that's what I want to see. You know, I want to see how am I going to screw my boss over.
No, it's not that. It's the I can't stand the kind of thing where it's like, you know, an example of this would be like going halfway, where the film kind of insults you. So there's a good, like, what's that, Prometheus? You know, where they're like, oh, maybe this is how humanity starts. And then they're like, oh, fuck that. You don't want to see that. You're an idiot. You just want this. You just want to see aliens killing people and stuff. That kind of thing. Okay. Yeah. Now you're insulting me because you kind of went there and then you drew back, right?
Yeah.
Like,
that's
the kind of thing. Yeah. What's that?
You mentioned the film Passengers.
Yeah.
Is that about the two who come out of their sleep and then like the guy manipulates her into falling in love with him?
Yeah, it's terrible.
I love that movie.
And it's wonderful. It's like my guilty pleasure.
That's like a heartbreaking movie. It's really good. And it's a great, you know, metaphor. I mean, obviously a lot of science fiction is just to create a circumstance for a dramatic situation. You know, and we were talking about like Brecht and epic theater. That's Brecht's concept. And why he called it epic theater is that you're not really supposed to care about the characters. You're supposed to care about their situation, right? And so it's supposed and a situation that can be changed, as opposed to ancient epics where the situation can't be changed, where you're just subject to cosmic fate. You know, you have your destiny laid out before you. I'm thinking suddenly of, do you know Napoleon, when he conquered Germany, he summoned Goethe to meet with him. And he said to Goethe, why do people still like tragedies? Why do people still like destiny plays? You know, so he was trying to have a conversation about art, Napoleon, with Goethe. And, you know, and Goethe tried to explain, you know, blah, blah, blah. And Napoleon was like, no, there's no fate, there's only politics. Right? Meaning destiny's in our hands. And, you know, so the epic, like that, and so Brecht is trying to use that, the focus. Like, the focus is on the society, the situation, the world, rather than on the figures, who may or may not be fully subject to that world. In other words, they're kind of destined to play the roles that they play. But the world could be changed, right? Unlike the ancient epic where the world can't be changed. And so it's operating with your imagination on another level. You know, there is a kind of, you know, I hate to concede this point, there's like a Lacanian kind of Marxist kind of concept. It's from Castoriadis, the social imaginary, right? That politics depends upon what people, the felt sense that people have.
Yeah, that was the next point I was going to make, actually.
Of society being potentially transformed. I mean, I think, unlike Castoriadis, who's coming up with that idea in the 50s, I actually think he, you know, even though he's very anti-Stalinist, you know, very anti-Soviet Union, I think he probably had more of a sense of possibility than we do.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's kind of what I was trying to get at, is that what I don't like is this idea of like jolting people out of their complacency, as opposed to giving voice to something that's already there, and sometimes even unintentionally, right? Like, why do I like these kinds of films like Passengers and Interstellar? Like, they're not.
I liked Interstellar, by the way. I just wanted to like it more. You know,
I
actually
love
did like
that.
it.
I love that. We're not, humanity's not destined to die on Earth. I'm always.
Oh no, I
going
love
back.
that. I always use that with my classes, by the way. I always
It's a
say,
fantastic line.
I say,
It's really
children,
good.
the point of, is not to save the world, but to leave it.
Yes.
Right? Like
Yes,
Interstellar.
exactly. Oh,
We're
I love
going.
it.
We're out of here, right?
Yeah, but that's the idea, is that what it does is that it gives it's like, it's not like oh, through this in a roundabout way, when you leave the theater you think to yourself, it's like you're there and you're like, I want that and I can have it and I'm almost there. That's the thing that I love about the really good sci-fi, where it's like
The staying power
they've
is
done
important.
it.
The staying
And I
power
can
is,
imagine it. I can
Right.
see the path that would lead us there. Now I want to have it. And it's not some filmmaker that's trying to jolt you out of your complacency. It's because they have the same imagination and can see the possibilities in the same way that I can.
Well, that was the point I was making about history, by the way. In other words, it's kind of like, it's generational. Meaning, when you're watching a George Lucas or a Steven Spielberg film, you're entering the imagination of the baby boomer generation, right? And you're seeing the world through their eyes, and they are also informed by their predecessors in film and how they transmitted that through film. And then we are kind of like, okay, how does that relate to us now? Like, in other words, I don't see the world the way George Lucas sees the world, not just for psychobiographical reasons, but for historical reasons. And so part of the fascination is, and then also when he's doing it, for the millennials, right? When he's making kids movies in the late 90s, early zeros for people who are like 10, right? Then, there is a kind of, it's not exactly didactic, but there is a pedagogical quality to it, which is, I'm going to teach you what film is, I'm going to teach you what reality is, what the world is, what the society is, what politics is, what girls are, what boys are, right? All of that, right? It's all like, this is why film is like very authoritarian. Like you're just sitting there, like masochistically taking it in, right? And the staying power, I think Doug and I were talking about what you think after the film, is just to emphasize that, yes, you're in the film and you're like experiencing it, but what about reflecting on that as you're having it? And that would be more the staying power, right? The staying power would be like making you think, and not making you think just cerebrally, but feeling, like how you feel coming out of the film. Like the emotional impression it leaves on you, the psychological impression, and that's where it's working more at the level of imagination. And we could describe that through psychology, but it wouldn't, that's just one way of looking at it, right? That wouldn't fully exhaust what we're talking about there. And that's where the subliminal and the suggestive and the surrealistic and, the things that don't make sense in one way but make sense in another way, and so, it's subtle because you can't beat the viewer over the head, and you also can't just give them exactly what they want to see, because they probably wouldn't accept that either. Like, so even the most explicit, like pornography, because I think that's what freaks people out about pornography, is just like the obsessive looking, like that you're allowed to just look in a way that you would never be able to in real life. That you can just look, and film is like that. But even when you're seeing everything you might want to see, you're still not seeing everything, right? You're right. There's still like your imagination is working, right? So I think that it's tricky because it's kind of like, okay, you just want visual enjoyment and fulfillment. The question is, well, that's not really available. So, there's always... I think that this is why the Lacanians would talk about, like, lack and insatiable desire and that kind of stuff. I don't think that's the best way of talking about it. I think it's more in terms of the open-ended character of the imagination.
Okay, I'm not going to defend the Lacanian approach here, but I do want to go back to this question of the epic that was raised in defense of the prequels, because there's two kinds of epics, right? There's the epic theater where what you're learning is your place in a universe defined by the gods. And then there's the epic theater of Brecht or others, like maybe H.G. Wells, where what you're learning about is what is the potential for humanity.
The historical, social, political world.
Yeah. But always with a humanistic and often enough, like with H.G. Wells, an optimistic perspective.
Well, because it's a world of our making.
Right.
In some way.
I didn't get a sense when I was watching either Star Wars or the prequels that is what Lucas was aiming to give us, was an understanding of the totality, except in so much as maybe he wanted to teach or illustrate more accurately a perspective on the human on human psychology and the human experience that, like Bill Moyers talked about, Joseph Campbell's A Hero's Myth, Jungian psychology. Like that, I think that's where
people, right? When people analyze Star Wars, the first Star Wars and Lucas, they would reach for like these archetypes, right? So the Joseph Campbell or the Carl Jung, and I feel like that's a kind of a flattening. In other words, like it's true that George Lucas studied like sociology and anthropology, and everybody should, by the way, because it's good to have a sense of the specificity of our own way of life and just how different people have lived and how differently they've imagined the world, right? But you can get that through art. You can get that through the history of art and the history of literature. You can see sensibilities really radically changing. And you can see humanity transforming just within the history of art. You don't have to like step into a specialized field of anthropology to get that. And I think that's, it does get at something. But I also think, well, but what about the film part? And obviously film, you are like glued to the screen, you're watching, you're looking at these people on screen. So it's got to operate at that level as well.
I was thinking that kind of film, like seeing a film in the cinema is kind of the most kind of non-consensual of all these things. So I was thinking kind of like, you can't even turn it off, right? You can leave.
Right.
But apart from that, like you can't even look away really. You can't, it's loud enough. You can't take your headphones out, you can't look away from the art really. You can't skip a page in the book. So of anything, it's really kind of the most structurally kind of non-consensual in terms of just you take what you're given. And
authoritarian.
Yeah.
It puts you in a very masochistic place. And I think that, the way that we handle that then is that we can reverse it. I mean, that's like the pre-Oedipal psychology of it. In other words, the sadistic gaze of the viewer is what matches the masochistic situation. And by the way, that's what attracted me to that art form in some ways. I wrote poetry, but then the only visual art that I did was like film video. And I was attracted to the idea of like durational art, which I guess like drama is like that too. Like in other words, you're sitting in the audience, you're watching, you're kind of subject to this duration.
But I guess there's always a feeling within you that if you really want to be a dickhead, you could actually interrupt proceedings.
You could, and then the 60s generation had this kind of infantile notion of like radical art and like breaking the fourth wall and that kind of stuff. And it's like, actually, you don't have to break the fourth wall to break the fourth wall, right? Like it doesn't have to be so literal.
Yeah.
and you don't have to, get up and interrupt in order to have the space to think and reflect.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's not, it might test the limits of that, but it's not precluded by any means. I mean, I don't know, maybe it is in late capitalist culture. Maybe we can't watch a play the way people in the 17 or 1800s could. But music too, like any durational art form, you're kind of subject to it.
Mm.
You have to sort of harmonize with it. You have to kind of follow it, go with it. But there's still a lot of room for play, right, in that experience.
Have you heard of this play, The Play That Goes Wrong?
What do you mean?
That's kind of, I was thinking about that in those terms, but also it's kind of, in the end, it's kind of them just running down, like they choose which one. It's like very formalistic still because they're just choosing from a list of plays essentially to do that night. But it's still interesting, kind of at least playing with the idea. Because you imagine it would be quite interesting, I think probably actors are capable of doing it. Obviously, this happens on kind of a smaller scale, but I don't think there's really plays where like very serious actors kind of come into it and then have very loose guidelines about what they're meant to do and then kind of just riff, like that would never be on Broadway, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, film acting is totally different, and especially because they make them do so many takes. Like it's really nuts. And again, the position of the director, with respect to the actors, with respect to the other, people who are working on the production, and then also with respect to the viewer, right? So it's this funny kind of thing that's going on. And yeah, acting for the camera, acting for the stage, totally different.
I'm always wanting to throw clips up on the screen, and I'm going to ask you to
clip from one of the prequels.
No, you'll see. Here we go. This is I think this illustrates your vision, Chris, of what cinema is. Okay, and tell me if you think I'm right.
All right, I'm holding on here.
Fingers on the box at all times. All right. Hope you find the test a pleasant experience.
All right.
Mm-hmm. What
That's
is that?
enough of that. That is a clip from the movie The Parallax View,
Not Parallax View,
1974. It's a conspiracy movie, and
Right.
Warren Beatty plays a reporter who's investigating the assassination of a presidential candidate, and he gets inducted into the organization that trains lone assassins.
Yeah, they're programming him. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Right.
I think that I mean what you were talking about in the first hour about the humanistic, right? So I don't think it's an either or. In other words, I don't think that either film is like programming insects or it's humanistic. It's both.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And in other words, is it manipulative? Sure. But there's also room for play and imagination in it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, my theory of art is that the artist is just the exemplary subject, right? In other words, the artist is everybody, right? But just sort of ratcheted up and able to kind of formally objectify what everyone otherwise experiences, right? And then
to understand that scene that we just saw, and it goes on for a few more minutes, but you have to imagine yourself not as Warren Beatty,
right,
but as an audience member watching this montage in a movie about Warren Beatty.
Because, and the people who are making the movie trying to program him, right? So
right, but I mean, that montage sequence is not really going to program anybody, right? It is a weird 70s.
It makes you think, though, right?
Right.
It does make you think. It's kind of like, oh wait, do I associate that way? And what would it mean if I did? Right? And so it makes you understand the susceptibility to programming without itself having to really program you. Right? But it's kind of like, oh, I can kind of see how I am manipulated by cinema.
It's telling the audience other Americans are like this.
Yeah.
That's the
I mean, it was interesting to me that it used still images, right? It's because it seemed in that way to be trying to clearly that felt like the separation between kind of the audience and the apparent subject in the movie, right? That presumably he wouldn't be seeing flat images, but the reason that we're being shown still images is rather to give us an impression of what he's seeing without kind of being forced to go through this intense project as if they were animated, because then it wouldn't be us being able to absorb each image. It would be what it's trying to meant to do, which is to kind of bombard you in this
overwhelm.
Right. Also, it differentiates the movie on the screen inside the movie from the movie we're watching. It
Absolutely. No, I mean, I think that's the point of it, right? Like the point of it is to make you think about film, and again, like that is like the moment, like the 70s. It is kind of like, okay, we've been raised on this medium. What is it about?
Mm-hmm. Okay, Spencer, did you want to throw in here?
Hey, guys.
Oh, you're muted.
Wait,
Chris.
We kind of
Spencer, apparently, if Spencer and Chris are on the screen at the same time, they cancel each other out, because now I can't hear you, Chris. What happened there, I wonder?
Chris, we can't hear you.
Can he hear us?
Bizarre.
No,
he can't hear us. Okay.
He's talking about whatever he fucking wants.
This is the cinema experience.
Chris.
I'm going to tell him.
Chris.
You went away. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to see if I can mute him and unmute him, if that helps.
Chris?
Chris can't hear us. Oh, this is Spencer. Look what you did.
I mean, it's bizarre that
it's not your fault. It's just coincidence. You come on the screen.
I had absolutely no involvement in the controls.
There's no possible
I know.
but it happened at literally the same second.
Yeah, you come on the screen and he cuts out. That's exactly what happened. So I think that what it is there's some conspiracy against you and Chris. Like you're not allowed to be on the same screen at the same time. All right. Let's see. Chris, can you say something now? Say testing. All right.
Fucking weird.
It's too bad. Spencer, don't go away. You have to stay because now
I'm
Chris
here,
is gone.
but I'm just calling Chris to tell him what's going on.
Oh yeah, do that. But also, why did you jump on the screen? It seemed like you had something you wanted to say when you jumped in.
No, I just asked him earlier, and I think he was eating, and he finished eating, and then he answered my message.
Okay, so go ahead and call him. Stefan, you and I will talk now. So what did you? So did you see? Do you see why I threw that back to the parallax view? Do you see why I threw that on the screen?
I don't know. Why did you? Because obviously, I mean, it was interesting enough, but
well, it was because Chris is describing, you and Chris were describing cinemas as non-consensual, as masochistic, as you're just taking it in, and in the parallax view, he walks in, he's actually strapped down to the chair. The other version of it that I could have shown would have been, I think I can hear you, Chris. Yeah, Clockwork Orange. Yeah,
that's what I thought you were going to show, but then I realized it wasn't that.
But yeah, that was the one I was thinking of, because that is not still images, right? That's a much more intensive experience where you share the subjection of what the character's going through. While in this one, I felt like we didn't really.
But in Clockwork Orange, it's the opposite of this in a way, because they're deprogramming him. They're
what's
trying
the difference?
They're associating the images on the screen with pain, so that he will no longer be attracted to violence.
Right.
And in this one, they're actually training him to be violent. They're brainwashing him to be an assassin. Yeah. So in that way, they were opposites, but you're
supposed, in Clockwork Orange, even though he is like a violent bad guy, you're supposed to sympathize with him anyway.
Yeah, which is kind of strange.
Well, no, makes perfect sense.
Well, now, why is that, Chris? Why does that make perfect sense?
Because regardless of whether you're a sociopathic criminal, you're still a victim of society.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because also in Clockwork Orange, like he does his best to kind of make the character seem very alien, because they even speak this kind of alien youth dialect, right?
Mm-hmm.
But still, at the end, yeah, you're right, that even though he's like a complete monster, he's an alien in this way through his kind of ways of speaking.
He's still being abused.
Yeah.
He's still
but more than that, you identify with him because of the way the film is made, and because of the performance of the actor. He's a quite charming character, even at his worst moments, in a way.
He's a funny one, though, isn't he? That actor. I mean, I feel like he always plays these sort of semi-sympathetic.
Mm-hmm.
He was the villain in one of the Star Trek movies.
Yeah, he killed Kirk.
Oh, right. I didn't know that.
And he torments Picard, and he's funny. Roddy McDowall.
Yeah, Roddy McDowall. Yeah, and right, and so in that movie, in Clockwork Orange,
and he plays Caligula too, doesn't he?
Think so. I haven't seen that, but in
Clockwork
Orange,
Caligula. What's the point of a VHS store if you can't see the porn that you can't otherwise see? In other words, like, you can't go to the adult film section because you're not old enough, but you can still see erections and cum shots if you take Caligula off the shelf.
I'm not going to go into my porn use.
No, this isn't porn.
But this is pre-porn use, which is it's easy to kind of confess to because it's completely juvenile.
I would get Victoria's Secrets and stuff. But the point here is that, no, the point. Back to Clockwork Orange. The scene where it's really bizarre the way the audience is situated is the rape scene in that movie where he's doing a Gene Kelly dance,
imitation.
Singing in the Rain. Yeah. And so you're definitely put into this awkward voyeuristic position of enjoying the comedy of the situation and the violence of it.
And he's playing out a twisted version of like a film script. Right. So, but back to Star Wars.
Okay, back to Star Wars.
When is Clockwork Orange? What year is that? It's early 70s, right?
Yeah, I'll look up the date.
Maybe
It's in
73
the
or
70s.
71.
71, right. And Parallax View is which year?
74.
74, so all before Star Wars. Right. And I think the 70s were very self-conscious about the sadistic character of cinema. In a way that obviously the 50s and 60s were very indulgent. The film productions were very indulgent about that. But there wasn't this kind of like reflection on it in the same way until the 70s. And I do think it has to do with the Vietnam experience. So what I talk about in my essay is how the boomer generation was shocked by the moral ambiguity of their existence. Right? And therefore of history more generally. And they worked through a lot of stuff in their cultural production as a result. And maybe they worked through it more honestly there than they were able to do politically.
I'm wondering, on kind of relate to that, right now, kind of online, the Empire from Star Wars is probably one of the most kind of favored evil empires. Like, there'll be lots of people arguing that it was actually better than the Republic or whatever. But I was just wondering, because obviously I've got no idea, but was this a thing that people would say in the 1970s or 1980s? Or is that something that's come about? Is that something that Gen Xers would not say, but millennials or Zoomers would be?
Darth Vader is cool.
Yeah.
Right? Darth Vader is cool. He tortures the other Imperials.
Yeah.
Right? Who does he choke? Who does he force choke? It's the Imperial officers.
Yeah.
And, he's, again, he's like, he's like a skull-faced, totally black, like the most evil. Right?
Yeah.
But he's awesome, and you love it when he's doing his shit. You love it when he's choking the rebel who's lying to him.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, yeah, you're going to lie to Darth Vader? Of course you're going to get killed.
No, like he's like the cool rebel dark prince of the Empire, which I think is a character which people find very appealing normally.
Yeah, and they really fucked that up with, what's his name?
Kylo
Ren now.
Kylo,
Kylo Ren. It's a shame, right? Because dude wanted to be,
and now the most famous shot of him is where he's got his pants pulled up too high.
No, I mean, it's,
There was a question about the Disney-fied versions of Star Wars that I didn't get to ask in the public-facing podcast that I want to ask you now, which it has to do with one of my complaints actually about the sequels, the Disney version, would be the dishonesty of those films, because they started from a point where the Republic should have been reestablished, the rebels had won, and power should have been in the hands of a democratic or Republic spread across the galaxy. That's how the Return of the Jedi
instead,
ended.
they still have 12 TIE fighters total.
Well, no, the X-Wings are there.
X-Wings, yeah.
TIE fighters are the Imperial. But the point is, we start with like Images of the ruins of the Empire. There's a Star Destroyer.
Star Destroyer, yeah.
And but it quickly enough, it turns out that the resistance is still necessary, even though the Empire has been driven underground at best, and that they're outgunned and outflanked, and right from the start, with no explanation or even consideration of whatever it was that went wrong in the Republic. Why is Leia not like retired in disgrace if the Republic has fallen into such weak?
No, I mean, I guess the idea is that the New Republic doesn't take the threat of the resurgent Empire seriously, and so Leia has to like break the law and launch like an illegal resistance to the First Order, right?
Yeah.
Because the New Republic doesn't see the danger, whereas she, you know, as like a seasoned veteran of the Galactic Civil War, she knows, right? And then, you know, like Poe Dameron, right? That's the dude, that's Oscar Isaac character.
Yeah.
You know, is, you know, her main like agent or whatever. But the idea is that the resistance is like defying the New Republic to go after this.
Are there? I don't remember that. Was there scenes
Yeah.
where that was explained?
Yeah, like they're like CIA deniable assets of like the Republican leadership.
They
who are
show
taking
it
out
in like
when
the
the normal
early.
state refuses to.
How do they show it? They show it with Poe Dameron like meeting up with somebody who's like giving them information, and then Kylo Ren shows up and kills everybody, right? And there's some little bit of dialogue. I mean,
I think there's a bit where like they discover something about the Empire and they go back to their base and they're like, well, shouldn't we call in all our fucking guys now? And then Leia's like, no, they're still in denial or whatever, you know?
Yeah, that exactly. Leia's like, no, we're on our own,
Yeah.
right? So it's a little bit. I think I know what you mean, Doug, which is that it's a dishonest setup because it's totally contrived.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and also it just seems to me like there's no explanation as to why the new version of the Empire would rise up out of the Republic, whereas in the prequels, that is what the prequels are about.
Oh yeah, no, it's an Imperial remnant, right? And Ashley was talking about watching the Mandalorian, and that's also what's going on in the Mandalorian is that there are remnants of the Empire, and that's originally from the expanded universe, which they really should have just done films based on the expanded universe.
What does it mean to be a remnant or a fragment of an empire?
It means that you have like some military, you have a fleet that escaped, right? You have is that the Thrawn trilogy?
They're like Roman legions that are wandering around Spain in 1476, you know?
Yeah, like what, 30 years later, the TIE fighters that you managed to escape with?
Obviously, it can't be 30 years later. Like,
well, that's what it is in the...
I know. It's, the whole thing is, like, contrived in a way, and I see that Gene joined us. So
I had to jump in.
What I'm talking about.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say, I just want to add, like, I am not so soft on the prequels in the sense that I think they were poorly executed. Like, I think there's like the dialogue is kind of bad. They're like, you know, it's not Lucas's, like the scripts needed editing, and there are some story points that could have been improved on, right? You know, somebody did a whole video about how to improve the series, and what they should have done was like have Count Dooku in the whole second movie be actually secretly a good guy who realizes the Jedis are bad, and he gets killed at the end because he's doing the whole rebellion in order to like stop Palpatine taking power through the Republic. But I think what Chris points out is like those films had a vision, right? They were a vision with a story, with a sense of politics, and it was a liberal sense of politics, but it is a sense of politics with a narrative. The new movies are completely confused in that they have a completely unbelievable and contrived political premise upon which they throw in various things that they assume are political, but are actually, you know, it's like, for example, the whole story about, you know, the business people are funding both sides of the war.
Yes, that's what I was thinking of. Yeah,
that could have been a good story, but
it's just thrown in there.
It's just thrown in there as an element, and there's no vision to it because it's a movie by committee, and so they have to do things for fan service, like the whole. And like I fell asleep in the last one, and I have a high tolerance for crappy sci-fi.
No, the last one was very overwrought.
It was overwrought. It made no sense, and it's like the whole thing was just a shadow of its former self. It was a form. There was style, but there was zero substance. Whereas the prequel movies, like again, super poorly executed, but they had a vision that was at least somewhat coherent. And I would agree with Chris. You know, the expanded universe ideas were like much better. They had the blue guy, which they brought in now. They had the blue guy, Admiral Thrawn, who was you know, he was kind of like, he gets together all the remnants of the empire and is kind of like an Alexander the Great figure. But what I do think is like the genius of the Star Wars movies, if we take them as a thing, is like they're totally a critique of bourgeois reformism, because, you know, at the end of the day, like they reestablish bourgeois democracy following a Bonapartist interregnum, and ultimately that political order is completely unsustainable and reverts back to time. So it's so stupid, like that, but they end up, you know, what's the saying? History repeats itself, first time in tragedy, second time in farce, and the new order is the farce, right? So, and the Jedi, this is my theory, the Jedi are the Democrats and the Sith are the Republicans.
That's I mean, it's definitely the thing where kind of you win and yet you pretend to be in opposition is very Democrat.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No, I just felt like the Force Awakens could only be made in the era of Hillary Clinton and her defeat. Maybe it was
a bit. So. Yeah, it was a bit much. I mean, no, it's So, but let's leave the sequels aside. The sequels are unredeemable. The prequels are redeemable. And again, so I would make.
What did you think of Rogue One?
Rogue One, I thought was good. Yeah. I actually like Solo too, and I like Rogue One. They're very different. I thought the Rogue One was good. I mean, I don't like the way that it totally lines up with the beginning of The New Hope. Like, I felt like as long as
it'd be nice to have a bit of a gap.
Yeah, like I felt like if it was more temporally loosely related,
it would have had more freedom. Yeah,
but I liked the fact that all the characters die. I mean, I have to say, you know, when the Forrest Whitaker character dies, I'm like, okay, we're really doing this, aren't we?
But in some ways, it's not very Star Warsy because of that, right? Like, it's a very kind of gritty, realistic film, and in that way, not a space opera.
Right, and I liked, you know, there was some little maybe kind of millennial point to it, which is the what's her name?
Jyn
Erso, when she says, well, are you guys rebels or not? Like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, that they have to go rogue, you know, and, you know,
I mean, the first time in Star Wars, there was kind of, instead of it being the people in place or like the good rebels, and they're also most extreme, it was a time where it was shown like there were more extreme rebels and they were the bad guys or the semi-bad guys.
No, I mean, it was interesting. I mean, I was, you know, I was happy with Rogue One, which I think came out after the Force Awakens, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so I was like, okay, you know, because otherwise I was like, really?
Where are we going?
Yeah, like I was like, okay, like, is there nothing to look forward to here? But I like the animated films. So, I mean, the animated TV series, Gene mentioned Thrawn comes back in Star Wars Rebels, and that's a really great series.
Have you consumed any of the Old Republic stuff?
The video games, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's novels too, though.
Novels, no. I've read some novels, but I'm not like a total Star Wars novel person. I've read like some.
Yeah. Chris, I wanted to ask you to sort of step back out into Adorno land. And obviously Adorno's a critic who, you know, is a scold of 20th century forms, according to, you know, the standard academic view. You know, he's supposed not to like TV or film or text. Right. And, you know, with film, it's pretty, you know, it's a 20th century genre.
Yep.
And really, you know, as far as talkies are concerned, you know, it's the age of Stalinism, defeat, catastrophe. The 20th century is basically the history of film. And you were talking about like the question of the authoritarianism of film,
right?
You know, and I wanted to get you to talk a little bit about like the critical potential of authoritarianism and what kind of thinker Adorno is of the potential of a society, beyond the project of socialism, right? The constituted project of socialism, and how he's viewing film in continuity with the age of socialism and of bourgeois art. So I guess one way of putting it is like, you were talking about the kind of the scripted arts, right? And obviously, a novel is always the same, right? You can pick it up and you can read it again, and it's just the same. And obviously, there's a kind of analog between the arch bourgeois art form like orchestral music and
cinema,
film, and you talked about that, and in particular, even picked up on the question of like the kind of transitional moment of silent film and the role of music in silent film in the cinema hall. So, how do we think about Adorno as a critic of authoritarian art forms in sort of the age of the authoritarian state,
right? So let me say something.
Right, as a Marxist.
Absolutely. So let me say something about this. So I think that Adorno gets like caricatured and pigeonholed, and it's because of the sensibility of his readers, right? So he is more of a scathing critic of the art film, like meaning the Class A film as opposed to the B film, right? And he says the problem with the B films is that we can't even rely on the dregs, like because he's a socialist, he's a small D Democrat, he's with the people, he wants to like film, he goes to the cinema, that's the first thing, he goes to the jazz club. Right, so his criticism of jazz is not that it's not this hyper formalized classical music. His critique of jazz is that it's spurious freedom. Like, in other words, he, like everyone else, wants freedom in music and improvisation and that kind of thing. And he's like, jazz is a kind of ersatz version of that. It's like a false freedom. It's not
even really like a demotic form.
That's right, exactly. And so they just really mistake, they think, he likes high art, he doesn't like low art, and he likes classical music, he doesn't like jazz. And it's like, no, right? He does see this late capitalist art of the 20th century, whether it's jazz or cinema. And he is trying to find the emancipatory potential in it, even while he's recognizing the deep authoritarianism of it. I mean, the way that I like to put it is, if you think about the left in the 30s, the way we think about like the left, and we think of it as like anti-fascist resistance, right? And like, okay, just we have to stop the Nazis. We're putting the struggle for socialism on hold, and so we have to ally with the liberals who just killed us in the last counter-revolution to stop the Nazis. That's Stalinism. That's the Popular Front. That's not Adorno, right? And Adorno, like the Trotskyists, fascism's not the end of the story. It's not the end of the story. Meaning, even if fascism wins, the struggle for socialism continues. Right?
On the basis of fascism.
On the basis of fascism, right? That's the point. And so even the way like the Frankfurt School goes through, like that they're more concerned after World War II with the fascist potential within liberal democracy than they are with the avowed fascists who have been relegated to the margins. Well, they're interested in the potential, the dialectical potential of that fascist potential within liberal democracy. In other words, it's not just like, oh, let's root it out. It's rather, what are we going to do with this situation? Because that's the point. The point is not, oh, look at how bad things are, but to try to find the contradiction in it and therefore see how it could be changed. And, the authoritarian state, I'm thinking of like Michael Harrington, for example, right? He's the godfather of the DSA. And he wrote an essay for, I think, Praxis International in the early 80s called Marxism and Democracy. And he's, there's his Shachtmanite, he's like anti-Stalinist, right? like anti-Soviet. But he just says, well, of course, it's easier to achieve socialism in the Soviet Union than in the United States. Because in the Soviet Union, you just got to overthrow the bureaucracy. Whereas here, you have to, in the United States, we have to overthrow the bureaucracy and the private capitalists. Right? So it's like, right? And again, like that's Marxism. Like you got to be thinking that way. You can't, it's not about, oh, we're in a dead end and, you know, oh, we can't let fascism happen because that will be the end of the story. That's not a Marxist approach at all, at all. And so in the realm of art, and that's why I talk about it in the essay as I did, that the antidote to the authoritarianism of film is not to resist it, but to go all the way into it, right? The only way out is through. And so the question is, what's the critical potential of the manifest authoritarianism, including the authoritarian psychology, the sadism, and the masochism of this art form? Right. And you know, like, yes, the sonata form of, you know, older bourgeois music, of course, had a space for play and the imagination and like co-composition of the music with the musicians. As you're listening, you're composing the music in your head. You know, you're learning about music as you're listening to it. Well, okay, what if capitalism has actually flattened that out, right? So that we can't have that experience quite the same way anymore. Well, that doesn't mean that the experience is non-contradictory, right? In other words, precisely there is where the potential might remain, is that we know we're supposed to be having a bourgeois experience, but we're also, neither do we want that, nor can we really have it. And we are rejecting it, and we are being infantile, right? And we do want to tear it all down, and we do want to dissolve music into noise, right? Well, what's the potential of that, right? So again, the assumption is that even where capitalism dominates us completely, that's not the end of the story. And obviously in cinema is where capitalism completely dominates the imagination. It's not the end of the story. Doug, I can't hear you.
Go ahead, Doug, if you wanted to jump in.
Yeah. If I had muted myself. If we understand that, but you see, you're a filmmaker, and you understand that the only way through to emancipation in the face of authoritarian media like filmmaking is to go all the way to the end and to find the contradiction on the level of this new flattened cultural space. What do we do with that information? Like, what kind of films ought people to be making, and if they're self-aware about the authoritarian and flattened?
That's where the history is important. In other words, that's where, you know, like any art, the experience of it at an aesthetic level is predicated on the prior history of the form and the medium. It's based on everything that you've heard before in music, everything that you've seen before in film, right? And so making history apparent, right? In other words, making the texture of historical time apparent. And that's where, again, like, I think that it's sort of botched when we think of it as like postmodernism, like postmodernist cinema, right? Because it's kind of like, oh, well, cinema used to be done in earnest, but now it's done with kind of irony or something. And it's like, well, wait, when was cinema ever done in earnest without irony? Right? It was always, especially if you go back even to the silent film, right? And, you know, because of course it's picking up from the history of visual art, and it's picking up from like opera and stage drama and classical music, you know, and it's playing with all those things. When has film not been ironical? Right? And again, so can you see George Lucas's irony? Or are you unable to penetrate the deadpan humor?
I mean, to me, it, you know, when I watch the prequels, it's amazing, like how heavy-handed it is. You know, like this is a children's movie. It is cartoonish, right? There are the like switches scenes, and it feels like a Batman episode or something.
Yep.
Right. And then he'll just say things. You know, he'll put like words in the Emperor Palpatine's mouth, like, "We'll reestablish the Empire, and then we'll have peace." Right. And you know, he's just hammering you over the head with like, you are reveling in your like infantile like ambivalence, right? And you don't know what you want, and you know, can you reflect on this at all? I mean, it almost strikes me as like, it's amazing that people came out of it and they were just like, yeah, I didn't like
yeah, they don't see it
or something.
Yeah, it's very strange because a lot
and
of
Anakin's lines are so, I mean, they are so bad, right? They even talk like teenagers.
Yes, they talk like teenagers, which I think is like, it's like Lucas allows his hostility to youth to really manifest.
It's unreal.
Yeah. And again, like, it's kind of like, wait, do people forget that everything in film is intentional? You know, it's because they've shot those lines 20 times. There are no accidents or mistakes here. There are no badly delivered lines. Everything is exactly what George Lucas wanted. And so why did he want that way? That's the point, right? Like, you have to grant.
I feel like he literally destroyed the careers
of those actors,
of Natalie
that was
Portman.
True of the first trilogy too.
Yeah,
that's true, yeah.
Their careers were ruined too.
No, Harrison Ford's career
only because of more George Lucas. I mean, he's in. No, it's true. Harrison Ford. No, it's true. It's like what's the movie where he's wrongly accused?
Presumed innocent. He's in
Fugitive.
Regarding Henry. He's in The Fugitive.
No, I know.
He's in Working Girl. He's in.
He might as well be a different actor, though, right? Like,
yeah, he's in a remake of Sabrina. You know, like Harrison Ford had a honest to God movie star's career after Star Wars. Like
he did.
Mark
you feel like Luke Skywalker should have, and he had the opposite.
Yeah, well, but do you feel like that really? That's only because he gets a protagonist role, but he's not the most interesting male role in the Star Wars movie.
Yeah, but there's other films which need a boring front man to have an interesting man bounce off of him.
I mean, there is a
way. I mean, there is a way in which the prequels are, they play on the fact. I mean, I think that Lucas is using the fact that he has blockbuster box office guaranteed because it's got the name Star Wars, right? Obviously, the first film, I was telling Chris this, when my dad took me to see Star Wars, like he came out and it was like he just watched Shane or something. He was like, that was a good flick, right? It was like, this is a Western or something, right? And it's a spaghetti Western, right? And there's a lot of just slapstick stuff that, there isn't there in the prequels, right? The prequels are much more like unforgiving. You have to think about the whole film, like even the level at which you laugh is not self-conscious, right? I mean, I remember people laughing in the theater, like when Leia and when Leia and Solo are like having their banter, right? And there's just none of that in the prequel films, right? And in that sense, there's nothing to like about the characters. I mean, they're dumb teenagers like throughout.
Oh yeah, and everything's cringeworthy the way teenagers are. Right? I mean, teenagers are cringeworthy, aren't they?
Yeah.
I want to bring up another movie altogether and just indulge me for a second, and it's not maybe relevant at all, but I recently watched The Purple Rose of Cairo.
Oh yeah.
Woody Allen's movie about the moviegoer who falls in love with an actor on the screen, and then he comes off the screen to seduce her. Jeff Daniels plays the actor and the character in the movie, and that movie I thought was really interesting in terms of the way it challenged the audience to think about what they're getting from movies and what their desires really were, and when that they and whether or not they have the courage to actually pursue what they desire or not. Because Mia Farrow's character in that movie is given the opportunity to actually pursue her fantasy and to live it out. And
I mean, Woody Allen is good. Woody Allen is great, of course. I just think George Lucas is different, meaning there's a wickedness to George Lucas, like a total, like, evil, like, intention, you know?
And you think Woody Allen is like a softer, nicer, more human kind of, like he gives his characters.
He does some of that. He does some of that too. But I'm also thinking of like Spielberg and like, you know, like E.T., you know, or something. You know, like it's like they are wicked. You know, there's a really dark humor going on there, and an indulgence. And it's, you know, it's not to everybody's taste. I mean, look, taste is whatever, right? But, you know, and I can, you know, I mean, my attitude towards these kinds of things is that I can appreciate very different kinds of films because films are very different.
I guess I would point to like The Purple Rose of Cairo as being a movie that is commenting on cinema,
yes,
and on the and on the culture and the time, even though it's looking back, in a way that allows the audience to come along very easily with the movie and see what it's doing, so that you know, you don't miss it. You're not going to read it as, oh, this is a movie that really wants me to think that movie characters can walk off the screen, but you might miss it with the Phantom Menace, that this is a movie that is taking these ideas and this story seriously in a nerdish way, and I'm just not gonna take it seriously. This is beneath me. You know, you know, that's, I think, what people who rejected the Phantom Menace, and even people who rejected the original Star Wars, were doing. It was like, this is asking me to regress, to be infantile, in a way that I don't want to be. And
no, I mean, I think all art has that character to it. It does have a kind of regressive character and a kind of infantilization, and a lot of taste has to do with what you feel comfortable regressing into, and how it achieves that, how it gets you there. And, you know, of course it can be off-putting, you know, but that's where we're, you know, again, it's like the blockbuster, what Spencer was mentioning, but also what Stefan mentioned, like the authoritarianism of film, like you're there, you're sitting quietly in a dark theater, you have to watch it. And, you know, I think that it's kind of like you think you're getting one thing, but you're getting another. And I do think that Spielberg and Lucas both do this, which is that you think you're just going to get a kind of mindless escapist sci-fi action movie, but you're really going to get this kind of like totally, I don't know what this is, right? And I think that's the part that people were thrown off by. And, you know, I just feel like, you know, like, obviously I watched the films and I appreciated them. And, you know, but why I wrote this essay for Sublation is just to let people know that you can find the substance and content in something even if you don't like it. Right? It's not about liking it, you know? And, you know, obviously billions of people have seen the prequels. You know, like, obviously a whole generation was raised on the prequels around the world, right? And it has left a mark on the imagination. What do we do with that?
Can I pick up on, you made a comment about how you can learn, you know, what you can learn from anthropology or sociology from the history of art. and that's a sort of obviously true. Like you can go to the museum and you can get familiar with like Greek sculpture and medieval art, and that's a deep. Yes, it is. It's a deep sort of. Just like you can read ancient literature, and it's a deep immersion in
to another world
produced that art.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you could talk about how that's a little different in the age of with the rise of bourgeois society, and also the 19th century with the transition to capitalism, and maybe bring it around to the kind of pathos of the boomers, right? And what renders it a kind of a postmodern form versus our sort of postmodern moment.
Yeah.
Right? And, maybe why, like, in that sense, like eras of political possibility also achieve a level of historical consciousness expressed in art.
Right. So what do we do in the ruins of bourgeois art? And that's been with us for a long time. That's like a modernist thing going back into the 1800s, into the mid 19th century. It's funny how late 19th century art, like high modernist art, has now been turned into like pretty pictures, because they certainly weren't experienced by people at the time as that. They were experienced as wrecking art and really disturbing experiences. So I teach here at the Art Institute.
Or Mahler is turned into like classical music.
Yeah, Mahler is turned into classical music, right? Exactly, right? And so, the 20th century, has this character to it. And obviously the baby boomers came to this experience and confrontation with history rather late. And, in other words, they come to it after the end of history. So the way that I like to put it, because I was talking about the Nazis and how that captured the imagination of the boomers, and we caught the tail end of that, the fascination, even the TV shows. Like, wasn't there like a funny TV show where the Americans are prisoners of the Nazis?
Yeah. Oh gosh.
Don Rickles is in it, maybe?
No.
Black Sheep Squadron?
No. Gosh darn it. Hogan's Heroes.
Hogan's Heroes, right? And
Yeah.
it's kind of like,
Good one,
what?
Doug.
Like, you're making fun, making light of the Nazis. And so I always like to explain to my students when teaching like the Frankfurt School, especially post World War II Frankfurt School, that look, we're living in a post-apocalyptic world, meaning the worst has happened. Like, the worst that you can imagine happening has already happened. But the world continues on, right? And that's what gives, like, classical Hollywood cinema and post-World War II cinema. And then what do you do if you're a young person and you're fired up in your imagination by all these movies you've watched and you want to make movies? What do you do with that? And that's where I think there's a difference between the boomer generation and what comes later, because it's no longer a confrontation with history and are we past the end of history and what is this schlocky medium, right? That is like the medium. Like if you want to engage the culture at large, don't you have to make a film? Isn't that the only way to do it? Right? But everything in cinema had been done. Like let's cut to the chase. Not only had everything happened, genocide, nuclear warfare, everything, right? It all happened. It was all behind us. Everything that could be done in movies had been done already. Nothing. You can't do any. Like in the 1970s, can you do anything different in cinema than what's already been done? No, you cannot do anything new whatsoever. So what do you do with that? Right? And that's really new wave filmmaking generally. And again, it's we kind of
But
flattened it.
how
to
is like the liquidation of that like attempt, like the abandonment of that attempt, like masquerade as politics and progress?
You mean today?
Yeah.
Well, I think that I mentioned this in the public, half of the program, that I feel like the problem with filmmakers now, starting with our generation, is that they're really inhibited. Right? They can't allow themselves to indulge themselves the way like Spielberg and Lucas do. And obviously you get like the in-between generation, like the kind of Quentin Tarantino's and Spike Lee, because Spike Lee did some interesting things along the way too, where they did allow themselves to kind of indulge themselves. But I think that they had a sense that even they couldn't do it the way the older generation had done it.
What about Soderbergh?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, but again, it's restrained. There's a kind of restrained quality to it. There is something where, so this is the example that came to mind. That is going to be a weird example, but it's nonetheless an example. So, Moïse Postone, right? So he wrote an infamous essay on Indiana Jones, the Temple of Doom. And he condemns it. It's in Jump Cut. It's in Jump Cut, right?
Wow, yeah.
Avant-garde, yeah. And it's just a dreary essay. It's really bad, and some kind of feminism and some garbage, right? And and I'm just like, no, Moish, no, sorry, no. You kind of jump the shark on this one. But then he had said also that in the 70s, when he saw Rocky and Star Wars, he knew that everything was going to become deeply reactionary. And I'm like, Rocky? What's wrong with Rocky? Right? Rocky.
Mm-hmm.
Like the first movie.
Yeah.
Which is the working class hero and this and that. I mean,
what was his reason?
He just thought, well, it's like a man. It's like a boxer. It's like a worker who like is a
beats
boxer.
up on the black people.
Yeah, well, there's that. I mean, and so it's just like, it's just
even though he loses the fight.
Yeah, too patriarchal, to this, to that. And I'm just like, Moish, no, right? But anyway, so check it out. So I researched, I read this essay by Moish, and I'm like, yeah, Moish, you're full of shit here. And I researched Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And there is like a recorded dialogue, transcribed dialogue of George Lucas and Steven Spielberg spitballing ideas. Mm-hmm. So the Asian boy in the film?
Yeah.
He's supposed to be an erotic rival to the woman for Indiana Jones, sexually. Explicitly. They're like, yeah, this is supposed to be, like, it's supposed to be understood that there's like a pederastic relationship between the Asian boy and Indiana Jones, right? But it's, of course, never shown on screen, but it's informing the script and it's informing the shots. It's there. And I'm like, I don't think our generation or subsequent, I don't think that they understand the medium. In other words, that
they would never have that. They would never speak that out loud.
They would never have that conversation, right? And it's not because, in other words, they are just like, it's not because Steven Spielberg and George Lucas are particularly perverted people. They just understand you put characters on the screen, you're asking the audience to relate to them erotically. That is just inherent in the medium. That is just what's going on. And it's all very plastic and perverse. Everything's topsy-turvy. And, all that Moish could say in his essay was that female sexuality is shown as dangerous. And Indiana Jones is brought back to, like, pure masculinity by the little boy against, like, the threat of, like, vaginal
Oh my God.
terror.
I have to, okay, look, I'm going to like.
And it's a fucked essay. It's just like, Moish, stop. Like, again, because he's, like, freaked out by the medium. In other words, he's watching the film.
These are the same people who cannot deal with what Freud says about homosexuality.
Right.
Okay, exactly. I'm going to put the link to the Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom essay into the description for this video, and I'm going to read it because, oh my gosh, the fact that he wrote about that at all is really stunning.
No, but again, like, we have to understand, of course, all of us Marxists, all of us crazy leftists, we're living in the world. We go to the movies. You know, we're consuming everything that everyone else is. We're listening to music. We're watching TV, right? That's always been the case. Again, Adorno went to the jazz club. He watched movies. He watched TV. You know, like, none of this is, like, foreign to him. You know, he's not living in some kind of, like, you know, bourgeois high art castle in the clouds somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but again, like, I think that if you're not willing to think about film at that level, then you have no business making films, right? In other words, film is a hyper exploitative, voyeuristic, sadistic, polymorphously perverse medium in which your identification is all over the place and everything is deeply fraught and, you know.
Well, I mean, you said it all when you said films are like dreams.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
all your forbidden desires are on the screen. Mm-hmm. And the filmmakers used to be very conscious about what they were doing with that. And now
it makes me really worry about the Minion movies.
What foul dream?
Sure.
And yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, so in the 90s, so we were talking about my appreciation of 90s culture. When were the Teletubbies? Was that 90s?
Yeah, that was late 90s. My kids watched Teletubbies.
I watched them when I was a tiny baby, so.
Yeah, and I when I first saw the Teletubbies, I was like, this is, like, really creepy.
They're quite monstrous.
But really wild.
Yeah.
And really fascinating. And I just thought, wow. You know,
there were two shows. There was the Teletubbies and there were the Boobahs. The Boobahs actually fly around in the sky by farting.
Oh, wow.
And when I saw the Boobahs, which was aimed at even younger kids than the Teletubbies, like pre-verbal, it seemed to me. I just thought, well, I mean, obviously what's happening is the aliens are out there and they're preparing us for their arrival.
You know, so all art aimed at children is made by adults.
Yeah.
Right? So we have to remember that. And how twisted is that? Right? It's like Looney Tunes. It's like old cartoons. Like, can people make cartoons like that anymore? I mean, they kind of come close sometimes, like, I don't know, Ren and Stimpy, The Simpsons, but still not like that old stuff. Right? That old stuff was, like, very indulgent, very, like, hyper, again, sadistic.
Guys, I need to go watch the football.
Okay.
But before I do, Chris, did someone pass on to you Connor praising your article?
Oh, I didn't see it.
Connor Kilpatrick?
Connor Kilpatrick, yeah. Our friend in Hollywood.
Great.
Writer of
So where was that? Was that on Twitter, or where did he write that?
No, he wrote it to me in a message and told me to tell you, but then I'm not in contact with you, so I was like,
excellent, thank you.
Yeah, no, he said that he enjoyed the article a lot, but wanted you. He was always waiting for you to get into praising specific aspects of kind of the composition.
Okay, so why didn't I do that? That's a point. That is a very clear point. So I definitely eschewed, like, analysis of the films because I wanted to emphasize rather how to look at them.
Yeah.
Right? And because otherwise it could have been like twice as long of an essay.
Yeah, I was going to say, one reason is it's too fucking long.
Yeah, it's already a really long essay. But I do miss that because, like, I had all sorts of illustrations in mind. And so I decided that I'd sort of hint it by reference to, like, the birds, you know, like being like the Geonosians, and, you know, that kind of thing, you know, coming out of the woodwork and, you know, the kind of haptic assault from the screen on the viewer. You know, so, but I eschewed that in particular because I just thought, well, actually, I am going to make the contextual point and something that we didn't talk about, the politics, the political parable. Yeah. Like, I really wanted to foreground that about, you know, the parable of the end of democracy and this kind of thing. Because I thought that's really George Lucas's point, and it is the point of his generation, meaning that it's not like, okay, this is only happening in the 90s or in the 2000s or with the war on terror. It happened in the 60s. It happened with LBJ and Nixon.
Yeah.
You know, like and it happened even before that. It happened with the rise of fascism to begin with. And what do we make of that, right? And how is film, you know, because people are like, oh, yes, George Lucas, he imitates Leni Riefenstahl. Well, what does that tell you? What is Leni Riefenstahl?
Yeah.
You know, it's fascist propaganda, but it's modernist filmmaking. It becomes part of the history of cinema. What is that? Right? Is that just a forbidden object? Like, what is that? Is that just like a reference, like a semiotic factoid? You know, that we're supposed to be thinking about, like Hitler. It's like, yeah, but let's really think about that.
The other thing is, I really had it on my mind when you were talking about George Lucas is kind of like a trickster. Is that the first script that got Connor read in Hollywood was he did a biopic script of George Lucas, which was apparently very good, but it can never get made because of all the rights issues involved.
Oh.
But I think it's interesting that he's also very much interested in the character of Lucas himself.
Of Lucas himself, because he is like, and you get the sense that, again, why he just sort of sold it, just sort of dropped it all.
Yeah.
Right? And, you know, so he's a little bit of an enigmatic figure. And I think that, you know, again, what Spencer pointed out when Lucas said about the prequels that they're children's movies, right? It's like loaded. Because clearly the first movie is like an 8-year-old boy's view of the world. The second movie is an adolescent boy's view of the world. And the third movie is more like on the threshold of adulthood. Like, clearly the sensibility of the films track with respect to that. But again, that doesn't sum it up, right? It's not like The Phantom Menace is just for 8-year-olds. Obviously not. And also, so, you know, what is an adult telling an 8-year-old, and how are they telling them that? And of course, even an 8-year-old has seen a lot of film and watched a lot of TV.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, you know, so even when he says things like that are kind of like throwaway, it's kind of like, oh, well, he's just evading responsibility for making a good film. It's like, no, he's telling you something. Right. Because again, all films are children's films. All films are infantile. All films are regressive. Even the most adult, serious, Class A pictures, right? And so, you know, again, what do you do with this medium? That's really the question. What do we do with this medium now? And it is kind of like, my own sense of it is we have to relearn film 101. The way we have to relearn civics 101 and politics 101. Like, we have to relearn film 101, goddammit. You know? We can't just like run with this, like, you know, I don't know, infinite internet database of styles or something. That's just not gonna work.
Can I read you the beginning
I gotta
of
go.
Moist Pistone's
Bye.
The Return of the Repressed By? And then, because I think it doesn't, it's like you've taken Moist Pistone and turned him on his head or twisted him inside out. It's George Lucas and Steven Spielberg have emerged in recent years as masters of Hollywood entertainment cinema. They specialize in slick, technically sophisticated science fiction and adventure films modeled on the popular culture of the 1930s and 1940s, and promising a way to recover the innocent pleasures of childhood movie viewing. Yet Lucas and Spielberg's high-tech, traditionalist mythology lacks innocence, and this is nowhere so apparent as in their latest blockbuster, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Although much of the critical debate on the film revolves around its entertainment value and its suitability for children, some critics observe that the film projects a worldview. And he says, it is clear that Lucas and Spielberg do not intend any commentary on pop junk of their youth. On the contrary, they have simply found the world they want to live in.
No, see, Moish is doing there exactly what people mistake Adorno for doing. He's just scolding.
But yeah, okay.
There's no dialectic. There's zero dialectic to that article.
Right, but like, okay, so but he goes on, he says, the main thing that he says is that there's no innocence. There's a line.
He wants to deny the innocent pleasure. He's a scold. He's
Right,
saying
but no,
you can't
but
enjoy this.
he's saying
Innocent.
Lucas and Spielberg, they've created a mythology without innocence. Well, what does that mean?
Well, it means that they're trying to go back to an innocence, but of course they can't.
I'm just trying to think dialectically here, where he
Uh-huh.
isn't. Okay, it's like, okay, if it's true that Lucas and Spielberg lack innocence, then that means that we have to watch their film from a more jaded perspective. We can't
No,
take
well,
it in.
that's the difference. That's the difference. I would say that's where Moish is being a scold the way people think Adorno is being a scold. Meaning, people think Adorno is out to spoil your pleasure. And Moish is exactly doing that. He's trying to spoil the pleasure. And my point is, I talk about it as the nostalgia for nostalgia.
Mhm.
Right? And in other words, it is a meta reflection on that. Right? In other words, it's not just, oh, they are trying to reproduce their youth, but in this uninnocent age after Vietnam. It's like, no, they know what they're doing. They're not, right? They're not just regressing. Like, Moish is turning Lucas and Spielberg into unself-conscious regressives. That's not what's going on.
Right. No, that's what I'm getting at. If they really, truly aren't innocent, then they're self-conscious.
Yes. And, I would say the difference between me and Moish is that Moish doesn't know what it means to make a film. I do. I taught film students in the industry, Columbia College here in Chicago. And, of course, I have a film degree, like, an MFA. So that qualified me to teach production. And I taught film and video production. So I know the basics. Again, film 101. Mm-hmm. And, in other words, I know what every, advertising photographer knows that Moish doesn't know, right? Because Moish doesn't understand that we're not just being subject to the unself-conscious regressiveness of the artist, but that you can't make art without being aware of what you're doing.
Right.
My point about the younger people, it's not that the younger people, the younger filmmakers don't know what they're doing, but they've lost a historical mooring for understanding what they're doing. Right. In other words, they have all the same references. What they lack is a sense of history to it. Like, they have all the same references that, they've gone to film school, they've paid attention, they've watched everything, but they don't have the sense of history as an element of that. Instead, history's been flattened out, and there's just a kind of endless array of styles to choose from and references to make without any historical time and historical process and the ironies of history built into that.
It's funny that the millennials that I've talked to, so many of them do the same move, no matter what we're talking about. They'll say to me, of course, that started in the 80s, whatever it is, right? That started in around 1980. It's like, what else started around 1980? Well, and they did, but the point, right? No, that's but there's this sort of like,
don't you talk bad stuff about millennials? I'm watching you. I'm listening to you.
We know who's watching this video.
Yeah, I'm in the background. I get it from Spencer and Doug, and now you, Chris, attacking my generation. The greatest.
It's not only that, Gene. It's you holding that poor infant.
Yes.
All right. It's that we have to intervene in. We can't help you. Right.
Yeah, we can help you.
Yeah.
All right, guys, listen, it's been an hour and a half, much longer than normal for the Parrot Room. Thank you both. And Gene, thank you. What's your baby's name again, Gene?
Baby Viana.
Viana.
Which means wisdom in Avestan. And you do not realize how difficult it is to find a name that both Kurds and Persians will agree on, and that does not mean the name of some kind of flower or some kind of word to do with sexual chastity. So Viana, she is the wise baby.
All right. Goodbye.
In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military